Great evening to you, wonderful people. Welcome inside the Black Star Project, broadcasting here on WVON Radio 1690, the talk of Chicago. My name is Herb Howard, along with my equal parts beautiful and most always brilliant co-host, the one and only Miss Juliet Scott.
I'll
Jules,
take
how are
it.
you?
I am excellent. I'll take the mostly. Today I'll take the mostly.
Almost always, almost
Almost
always.
always. If you hit 100 all the time, you have nothing to aspire to. So, I'm just trying to make sure I keep it fresh.
99.99 in my book, love.
Well, thank you.
Back part two of a phenomenal conversation that we just didn't get to wrap up last week and just couldn't leave it there. So, uh, Gardis Watts, aka Gardis B, knowing stuff, was kind enough to join us again for another conversation. Gardis, how are you, brother?
I'm doing good, and thank you for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time, for making the time. I know you are busy, but we had gotten to that conversation last week, so I certainly wanted to continue it. Thank all of you all out there listening as well. We certainly appreciate each and every one of you. We won't be taking your phone calls today. We are actually recording this broadcast, so sorry that we can't take your phone calls and get your input. You know, it's always valued and certainly appreciated. But if you were tuned in last week, we got into a conversation about many of the uprisings and the coups, the takeovers that were happening, that have been happening over in the continent of Africa. And, we talked about how those things came to be, what the process was like during, and then what was the results in the aftermath of those things. And then we start to compare them to some of the situations that we're facing here in America, and what, if anything, Black Americans can learn from many of these coups that have taken place. And there's no better person than the great historian, the great educator, the great communicator that is Gardis B knowing stuff to join us. So Gardis will take the show and kind of follow your lead as we work our way through this conversation that we started last week.
Well, well, actually, I'm not the great communicator. That's you, Herb.
I
I
say
do.
it's both of you guys. My opinion rules. It's both of you guys.
But touching on what we were talking about last week in regards to the coups that was happening. There was the coup that happened in Gabon last week, and then a couple of weeks ago there was the big coup in Niger, where the Nigerian military took over the government and arrested the president of the Niger, Bazoum, President Bazoum of Niger, and was taken over by General Tassani. And so this is not actually something that is new, and it's not, and it's more of a recent phenomenon in the last 3 years, because over the last 3 years, we've seen 9 coups happen in 8 different countries. And particularly those countries are Gabon, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Chad, and Tunisia, all taken over by military juntas. And right now they are opposed to French neocolonialism, because many of these states are autonomous in their government. However, as we talked about last week, they are tied into the French, where the French control their economy, and they actually kind of control psychologically as well, when we talk
Yeah, the
about
minds. Yeah.
minds of the colonized. And so one of the things that I didn't express was the possibility of possibly more coups that might be happening. We probably have to keep an eye on Cameroon, which might be another one, and Senegal, which could possibly be another one. Those two are, have some sort of resemblance to the previous countries, mostly Muslim, They're colonized by France because French is the official language. And a lot of the people in those countries, just like with Niger and Gabon, half of them to 3/4 of them are living in poverty, even though they have minerals and resources that can garner them some money. So there's a possibility that there might be coups that might be happening in those places as well.
So, Gardis, what other than having the minerals and 3/4 of your population in poverty primes a country for a coup? Because there has to be some leadership, some voice, some collection to go along with it. You can't start a coup by yourself. So, what primes a country for a coup?
Well, basically, you have certain uprisings that happen. So in Niger and Gabon, there were kind of like mass demonstrations that happened. But what we talked about last week too, the military were the ones to implement the coup because of the fact that they have the guns, they have the weapons, and they were actually in line with the people. So the military was kind of politicized in this whole situation. When you talk about these generals who General Tassani, which I didn't say it last week, but he was actually trained here in the United States militarily, and what is it? The School of Americas. He was trained, and he goes back and becomes a soldier in the president's National Guard. They claim that he attempted a coup, but I guess he wasn't charged for that. But he continued to serve in the military up until the time he actually did a successful coup in Niger this time. So it's kind of weird that a military, a United States trained military, uprisings
Maybe United States.
uprisings against a government that is favorable to the Western powers.
No, that was probably the thing I found most intriguing when you mentioned it last week, is the fact that the military were so instrumental in these coups being here in American soil. That's tough to imagine. It's hard to even fathom that the military would be a part of an uprising against the government in that way. You talk about the president being, the commander in chief and all these types of things, just the way that the American government uses its military. It's kind of hard to imagine the military kind of rising up against it. But when you talk about having a country that's half and 3/4 impoverished, then it makes a lot of sense that the military would be themselves and their families more aligned with the larger population than the segment of the government. And so, but then to have the courage, the organization, and the unity to stand up against it, I think that'd be asking a bit much in America, but I'm glad to see it happening in other places.
Well, one of the things that I thought about too, I went back and went back to reading "Wretched of the Earth" by Frantz Fanon. And this kind of reminds me of a lot of what's going on on the continent, but also too, it's a reminder of what we've been dealing with, as well as as the colonized of America. So in the book, Frantz Fanon talks about the three different sects of class, because one of the things that we cannot ignore outside of the racial element is the class element that happens amongst us. So Fanon in his book talks about the three different types of the colonized class: the working class, the elite, which he calls the colonized intellectuals, and the lumpen proletariat. These are the individuals who are the poor, the marginalized, people that are outside of the margins of society, the forgotten people. And he talks about these conflicts between these three classes. And he talks about how the elite are the ones who are the most colonized because they've been educated in the colonizers' education system. So it kind
Right.
of reminds you of, what's going on today with our, quote unquote, the black elite, and them being educated in American universities, and a lot of us, including myself, have been educated in these PWIs. But it's also let us note too that in some respects HBCUs are following the same format. We initially have these thoughts that HBCUs are these radical institutions that teach you about
Right.
how to be how to form
Power to the people.
a black nationalist system, but they're basically training you how to be workers, just like the PWIs.
Right.
And no disrespect to the HBCUs, I love HBCUs,
Oh,
but at the same time we have to confront the realities of what they are. And so they were built as institutions because of the fact that many black people in the late 19th centuries couldn't go to PWIs, so they built institutions for them. But unfortunately, they're just copycats of what the higher education system is
hmm
to the public. So these people are the ones who kind of guide the elites, the intellects of our black society, are the ones who kind of guide everybody else away under them, away from performing violence against the colonizers,
Right.
because Fanon talks about too that decolonizing the mind is a violent process, because in
hmm
our process of decolonizing, we have to move away from what we've been taught, and we have to give up a lot in order to decolonize ourselves, from our enslavers. And this process of what the Africans are going through, being colonized by the French, because I think I talked about it last week about how the French have a unique way of colonizing folks. It's unlike the British, who basically they're more of the physical colonizers. They come in with the guns, they tell you what to do, but then when they left, they kind of left the Africans to their own autonomy, which is why you see a lot of the former British colonies are not too much tied into European neo-colonialism as much as the French colonies are.
And so do we not see as many coups or any coups among those countries, or?
Well, I mean, you really don't see them as much now. Back in the 60s, you saw the Democratic Republic of the Congo with Patrice Lumumba, which was a Belgium, which was colonized by the Belgians. But not as much, because if you look at the map and the what they call the quote unquote scramble for Africa, which is when the Europeans basically came to Africa and kind of divided. France took a lot of the territories in Africa, so that's why you see a swath of French speaking African countries down there.
When you talk about the book in which the Algerian took back or engaged in a coup or kicked the French out, was there any conversation around the French demanding money back from them? And then when you look at Algerian people, they're not as heavily melanated as we are. So is there a difference in how the French dealt with that incident or that occurrence in history?
Yeah, so that's interesting you bring that up, because that was actually the basis of Frantz Fanon's research when he wrote Wretched of the Earth, because he was actually part of the Algerian Revolution. And for those who don't know, Algeria was actually one of the first French colonies to fight against the French in the 60s. They had an armed struggle against the French.
And where is that, just for everybody else, because I looked it up since we talked, where in Africa is Algeria? It wouldn't be in the, what is that belt, the area?
The Sahel.
It's not in the Sahel region. Is that correct? Or where is
Yeah.
Algeria?
Algeria is in the northern part, so it's in the northern part of Africa. But but the thing is, Algeria is also is part of the Islam world, and also part of the Arab world as well. But when we take a look at those regions, now Algeria has a mixture of Arab and Africans in it, but when you look at the power structure of Algeria, it is mostly dominated by Arabs. While they are not European, they are not Africans as well.
Okay.
But the thing about
Right.
Arabs is that um, they have a different perspective on their particular identity, and this is something that is a it's something that is part of this conversation as well, because we as Black people in this country, we have an identity crisis. King talks about this in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, where he talks about we're not African because culturally we didn't grow up in Africa, despite the fact that we are genetically African. But then again, we're not American because we don't share the same liberties and the same
Not
protections
afforded
as
descent,
citizens.
right?
Yeah. So we are truly the African Americans because of the fact that we don't belong to Africa, but we don't belong to America as well. So we have to forge an identity within ourselves because we're a different group of people going through a different experience.
We're not all of either.
Yeah, we're not all of either. So while we are still under the oppressive system of white supremacy, it takes a different form in this country than we see in Africa or even in the Caribbean as well.
So you were saying about the,
I think that there's extreme. I'm sorry.
go right ahead, brother.
No, I was just saying. I think value that we are missing in not acknowledging our unique identity as Black Americans. I think it is an absolutely unique experience that's unique unto itself. And I think that if we were able to, find value in it and accept it for it being what it is, I think it would lead us to move differently. I think because we still strive so hard to be, you know, um, like white Americans, right? Without being afforded all of the luxuries or opportunities that Dr. King was speaking about. I think it leaves us in a space where we have no choice but to kind of believe that illusion of inclusion that we're always talking about. And it impacts our thinking. It impacts our ability to revolt against that, right? You can't revolt against that, and what you love is what Tucson says to me all the time. And I think that until we can understand that our kind of unique positioning within America, I don't know that we would be able to present a real viable threat against it to kind of reverse our standing within.
Yeah, and one of the concerning things about us here in this country is we get splintered on certain issues. Take for instance the reparations
Hmm.
conversation that is happening. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I am. It's not even a question of if we should get it. We deserve it, and we deserve
Right.
10 times more than what many people have been talking about because of the fact that we built this country.
Hmm.
And I know some of us think about
Right.
because because our ancestors built this country, and yes, they did build this country, that we own this country and we should own this country. However, we look at the realities of it, we don't own this country. Black people own this country as much as Black people own BET, a network that was actually started by Black people. It was started by Black people, but over the years, you start to see it wane away, and now BET is completely owned by white people. So look at it in that perspective
Right.
that, yes,
Right.
we built that network, but it doesn't belong to us anymore. But going back to the reparations conversation, I find it very I'm distraught about it because of the fact that we're starting to splinter even beyond what Frantz Fanon calls the class colonized, the way the colonizers have divided us into class, but now we're dividing ourselves into different classifications of, foundational Black Americans and American descendants of slaves, and is it about lineage or whatever they talk about, and it just gets so disheartening that it's like I don't even want to get into that fight anymore of reparations, because they've done a masterful job of using capitalism to divide us even more amongst ourselves. And it's just and it's just so disheartening with that. I mean, this should be an easy conversation for us. Do we deserve reparations? Yes. But how do we get them? That's the first step on how do we get them. We're already talking about
arguing about who should get something.
Yeah, we haven't even got past the first phase of how we're going to get it. So it just gets disheartening with that. And like I said, I pulled out Frantz Fanon's book because even though I read it a couple of years ago, I got highlights here that I'm glad I made highlights on it, because I thought this was a very important book. And Fanon says one thing that when he talks about national culture and identity, he has this on the first chapter he has on it. He says each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it, which I thought was very powerful when you think about.
Can you read that again?
Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. So we have to discover our mission, and either we have to fulfill it or we betray it.
I don't even think I got into step one. I don't even think we've discovered the to fulfill it. And so I think we to only betray.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But also too, with the argument of ADOS and FBA and the whole reparations argument that has divided us as a people over in Africa, when you talk about colonialization and how that all started, what started happening was they started putting up national borders when the colonizers came in, because if you look at pre-colonial Africa, there was no technical borders. Everybody was grouped in ethnic groups. The Igbos, the Hutus, the Fulanis, these are ethnic groups that group themselves together. Now they had areas, but there were no hard line borders. When you think about it, you look at Nigeria right now. Nigeria has 4 or 5 different ethnic groups. And the thing is that these national identities have caused a lot of confusion amongst the Africans there, because Fanon in his book, and I want to read this because he compares it to how the Arabs hold on to their identity and how the Africans get confused on their identity because of nationalism. So he says, in the Arab world, however, even under colonial domination, nationalist feeling has been kept alive at an intensity unknown in Africa. The Arabs do not always manage to forget their common identity when faced with an objective. Their actual cultural experience is not national, but Arab. So even though the Arabs have their own countries, they don't have a problem, going over the borders, helping each other out. Despite the fact that some of them might be in, religious conflicts. You had the Iran-Iraq war. You had the war between Iraq and Kuwait. You even have Yemen and Saudi Arabia, fighting against each other. But they've always understood that they're Arabs, and they fall under that particular category, especially when the Western powers come in and try to take over a particular economy or the oil reserves that they are richly filled in. So Arabs never forget that they're Arabs. And
I find that interesting because when you were speaking of how the Algerians responded after pushing the French out, and how they stayed rooted in their culture, I was wondering how connected it was to their culture versus their religion. And so it's important, like, it goes back to how you identify. It's not necessarily about the religion, but more about what flag do I fly under? And I fly under this flag of being Arab, and I'm going to ride with my people, period, the end. And we need to be able to function in the same fashion and not so splintered, because I think we have semblances of that, but it's not widespread. You know, when I say semblances of that, I say that there the conversation around, oh, I fly in the flag of ADOS, I fly in the flag of African American, I fly in the flag of Afro American, I fly in the flag of descendants. So like it's splintered, but the people that ride with their flag, they ride with their flag. But how do we find the larger identity so we could all ride like deep? Because it makes a difference.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you bring up the topic of religion, because in a sense, religion can help forge that identity.
Mhm.
But I think the thing is with religion, we have to stop looking at religion as institutions and looking at it as guideposts for, our own identities, for our own, revolutions. And religions should be more looked at as as just basic, basic roadmaps of spiritual existence, where we can live as full human beings. And religion should be looked at in that sense, because it takes out the cultural expressions that have plagued it over the last centuries. Whereas Christianity has become dominated by, Europeanization. Islam has been dominated by Arabism. And we just basically take those principles and practices and use it to our advantage, for liberation and revolution. So take, for instance, Christianity. So Christianity, if we want to look at it as a tool for liberation, we have to stop looking at it as a church. We have to start looking at it as an institution. We have to look at it as what are the revolutionary practices that we saw in our gospel readings of the Bible? What is Jesus to us as Black people? And if many people don't know who he is, I would suggest you pick up Dr. James Cone's book, God of the Oppressed, and understand where the scope of Christianity should be for Black people. If you don't know who James Cone is, I'm pretty sure most Chicagoans know who Jeremiah Wright is, and he was his mentor. So if you understand Jeremiah Wright, you understand James Cone, because that's where he got all his stuff from. So we have to look at the role of religion, and in the same way in Islam. Islam should be looked at as a liberating religion. We look at the start of Islam and how they were fighting against the oppressors against them, who wanted to worship the one God, Allah. And so we have to take those principles and practices and use it to our advantage. So we can't keep using the white Christianity, the white Jesus, forgive everybody despite the fact that they keep abusing us, because even Jesus at one point practiced violence, turning over tables. That's not lovey-dovey when you talk about turning over tables and taking a cat of nine tails and trying to hit somebody in the temple. That's a violent act, if you ask me.
There's no way around that.
No, there's no way around that.
So when we look at the coups that occurred in the countries in Africa that we initially started talking about, would you say that most of them identified the same way religiously, or and And again, if you talk about religion, you have to identify that you're talking about faith and believing. So it goes back to the whole conversation of who do you believe you are? How do you identify? But I'll let you answer the first question first.
Well, in most of those countries, they are predominantly Islam. So that actually works in their favor because France has been very much they've been very much anti-Islamic over the past couple of years. When you talk about certain things that has happened, in France and how they deal with this quote unquote war on terror, because in 2021, France passed this Islamic separatist law. And apparently it was supposed to, fight against Islam extremism. Basically, it's a law where if anybody is caught, talking bad against the French in a more religious tone, then they are liable for, they're liable to be charged for sedition. And many people in the Islamic world, fought against that because they thought that France was targeting Islam in a sense that they were. So these coups that are happening in these countries, being predominantly Islamic, it makes sense when you talk about not just France's control over African countries, but also their fight against, Islam and the old European, Crusaders fight, where the, European Christians were trying to fight, these hordes, as they call it, of Islamic non-white people.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You had mentioned, Reverend Jeremiah Wright earlier, and that kind of takes me to your last statement. It kind of takes me to the famously misconstrued sermon or speech that he was giving, and with the goddamn America piece, right? And it's like understanding what America has been, the relationship that it's had towards Black people, and how could you feel any other way? How could you look at those circumstances and not, view it that way? But I think that when you, first of all, you just take a small cut of a full speech or a full sermon, then you can manipulate it to be whatever you want. But even if you do just take that piece, there's a lot of truth in that, right? And I think that when you understand that collectively, then it should influence your thinking and then therefore your actions. But I think for us, because of the many splinters that we're talking about, you talked about, ADOS and Foundational Black Americans, Jules, you talked about, these different, I'm Black and I'm Afro-American and all these different things, all these different subsets that we like to rap for, and these flags that we like to fly, as you said, Jules. I think that it keeps us from understanding our connectivity and how we have such a shared experience, and it passed down from generation to generation to generation to now we have some of our younger generations, and it's this huge fame beef that they're having about, I'm from 63rd and you from 64th. Y'all live on the same damn block, right? You talked about, Gardis, people, the Arabs crossing countries to go help each other, even though they may have had differences of religion or whatever it may be, but understanding their connectivity, understanding their shared experience drove them to say, let's come over here so we can help you. We can't cross the street to help each other, right? Because we feel so divided, even though our experience is the absolute same.
Yeah. And speaking of that Arab, that Arab collaboration and togetherness, that's what actually caused the gas shortage strike in the 70s, where many of the Arab countries, especially the oil countries, band together to either slow down or stop production to the United States because they were supporting Israel. And these were countries that were basically fighting each other. When I just talked about Iran and Iraq, who's gone through several wars against each other. But when they started talking about supporting Israel, they got together, was like, hey, we're not taking this. And this is when that short period in the 70s where, gas prices, now imagine this, gas prices rose up to like $7 at that time. Now this is the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I mean, $7 is
super effective
now.
Right.
Yeah.
We heard with $5.
Yes, I know. We're complaining about $5 right now.
Man, I miss 99-cent days.
Yeah, indeed.
Who else been driving that long?
No, but that talks about how effective you can be when you unify, when you understand the power that you do have, when you start to recognize your points of leverage and then use that leverage to in negotiations for whatever it is that you seek. And I think that collectively as Black people, we have yet to identify our points of leverage and what those things could be.
You know, Herb, you brought up a point recently, moments ago, about how in this day we fight over, I'm from 63rd, you're from 64. But there have been times in our history in which we tried to, during wartime, sign up to volunteer and go fight a war because it was in Africa and we weren't allowed. Gardis, am I correct? Like, there have been wars that we've tried to participate in. We're going to go fight and address the issues in Africa, and the United States government said you can't go.
Oh yeah.
There have been times,
Yeah, when the back in the I believe it's the 20s or the 30s, when Italy was trying to colonize Ethiopia, there were a swath of Black Americans who were willing to go over there to fight the Italians from taking over Ethiopia. There was a large mass of people from Harlem who was ready to go and pick up their guns to go fight, for Ethiopia. So yeah, there have been times where the colonized or the attempt of colonization of Ethiopia rallied Black folks here to go fight them.
So I think sometimes we have to look at what is it we're fighting against, even when we have issues like, oh, I don't like the red. I don't like Black people that wear red. Well, I don't like Black people that wear purple. I don't like Black people that wear yellow. But if the enemy was large enough, I think maybe it would matter to us sometimes. Maybe we haven't met the enemy that's large enough for us to not care who's wearing black, who's wearing purple, who's wearing green.
That's what we don't understand what enemies look like. We don't if we don't think that our enemy is large enough, then we are just eyes wide shut because it's huge and it impacts every single component of our life. Every single aspect of our life is absolutely influenced and almost dictated by our collective enemy. Yet we see it more fit to beef about you being from the next block over. That's absolutely crazy. We see it more fit to beef about you go to the different church than I go to. We see it more fit to beef about, oh, I'm in a slightly different tax bracket than you. I'm in a varying degree of poor than you are. And so like we do all of these types of things when really our enemy is impacting all of us. And we don't see it that way. And some of us don't see it that way because we feel like we've gotten a little bit closer to said enemy than the rest. And I think we strive to be just like them. And so many of these countries where Gardis was speaking about earlier, they have these aspirations to be maybe not under the control of the French, but absolutely not different or separate from, right? They want to be just like them, right? I just don't want you controlling me, but I want to be just like you. And so it's not this idea of flipping the game over. It's just, I want to move further along the board. And I say, to heck with that. Flip the board over. It's rigged. You cannot win. Don't play this game. If somebody say, hey, sit down and play Monopoly with me. Cool. And then they gave everybody money to start the game, but you, why would you scrape and scratch and claw trying to figure out how you're going to get around the board? You ain't. I'm not playing this game. This is dumb, right? But we sit down and play it as best we can. And the moment I get a little bit further up that first little poor block than you, and I look back at you like, you must be a lazy, ignorant so-and-so.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about that because it leads me to thinking about a topic that we talked about on the show about the Haitian Revolution. And one of the tragic figures, even though he is celebrated amongst historians of Haitian Revolution, is Toussaint Louverture, who was an important figure in the revolution, but he was aspiring to be a Black Frenchman. So once he helped abolish slavery and helped abolish and actually kicked out some of the other colonizers in the name of France, when you talk about Spain and Great Britain, he tried to negotiate with Napoleon. and tell him, hey, I took the colony for you. I should be admitted into the French army as a general. And Napoleon, in his racist self, said, no, you are a, N-word and a state. So you don't deserve to be, on the same level. And many of the generals in the French army refused to call him General Toussaint, which what he was. He was General Toussaint. So in response to that, Napoleon sends a fleet to, quell this man because he is,
because he's getting out of place.
He's getting out of place, and that was one of Toussaint's weaknesses, trying to appease the French, to be accepted, which you can't be accepted in a society that always constantly looks at you as a lower class. So you had to have somebody like Dessalines come in and say, hey, you know what? We gonna kick all of y'all out once we defeat you. However, Dessalines, as good as a soldier he was not a very good politician. When you talk about when Haiti got their independence, because what led him to this downfall was appointing 2 generals in his army to run his army that were still French-minded. Even though they were Haitian, when you talk about Henry Christophe and Alexander Pétain, they still had French minds, and they wanted to get rid of Dessalines because of the fact that he was trying to build this autonomous Black nation, and they didn't want to have that. They wanted to have something similar to what France has. So we're in danger of having that, because many of our best, just like in Haiti, have that particular mindset.
Come on, Barack. I mean, I'm sorry, what?
Hey, it's more than just him.
It is. It's a lot.
I'm not Black. I'm old.
So I'm reminded of that movie. I want to say it was One Night in Miami. I think that was the movie, but it was Jim Brown's character, and he had become this famed running back, and he had done all these things and all these accomplishments, and he's back home on the porch of these old rich white folks in the South, and he's talking to the guy that I think his parents and stuff used to work for, and he used to work for, and they're sitting on the porch, and he's like, "Oh, Jim, it's so good to see you," and they're just talking, and Jim starts to view this thing like, "Oh, we're equals now, right? I've done so many things, and now we're on even playing ground." And then I think they bring out like some lemonade or something like that, and then it spills or whatever. And Jim's like, "Well, I'll help you. Just let me go in and get the mop or something like that." And the white guy looks at him like, "Jim, niggas aren't allowed in the house."
Yep.
And it's like you think that you've risen above this, and they will always remind you.
Yeah. And so I know we had the conversation about inclusion and us looking to be included, but I think I think there's a possibility it's not about a desire to be included as much as it is our idea of maybe that's what freedom looks like, and that's what I want. And I think that's reasonable. Like that, I'm not very good with songs. I'll start singing words of a song and then I'll start humming. It's been known to happen. But I can hear the Kanye song in my head. Welcome to the good life. That's Kanye, right? So it's crazy, that one.
Exactly. Word for word.
It's the idea of a good life, and not an idea of a good life, meaning a free life, a life in which I can do whatever I want to, and I can move the way I want to. And so it looks like the way to get it is to be where this other group is, not necessarily identifying there might be another way to have the freedom and enjoy a good life.
Here's how I will respond to that. I don't know that we know, independent of white input, right? Independent of what we've been indoctrinated to believe, I don't know that we know what we truly desire, right? So this idea of, oh, I just want to do what I want to do. I don't know that we know what we want to do, right? And so we look to that as, oh, that's the thing to do. And I don't think that we've had the freedom, the independence, the autonomy to really explore, okay, who am I, right? Who are we collectively? And then what do we want to do? I think we've only just been shown, okay, here's the game, here's how you play it. Now, how do we play it as good as they play it? We don't have to play their game, but I don't think we've ever recognized that or been much given a choice to play it another way. You come out of slavery and for hundreds of years, and then you come out of it, and the world is this way, right? And that's what everybody's doing. Okay, let me try to catch up to what they're doing. It's like, no, we don't need to do that, right? We need to, first of all, take a breath to pause, heal, acknowledge the centuries long trauma that we've just gone through, and then create our own plan to move forward, our own pathway forward. And I think that never having had the opportunity to do that, I don't know if we actually know what we would prefer in absolute freedom.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you critiqued about Fanon's saying about, what is our mission? Because in a lot of cases we don't know what our mission is. And I think the problem of fulfilling it is not knowing, what it is, because many of us believe that we have made it. Many of us
Right.
believe that, we make six figures or whatever, and we
Sure.
got this nice house and car. But the problem is that I guess with freedom and Jules, I guess what you were saying about it, I don't think it's necessarily what, it's not necessarily whatever we want to do is freedom. I think it's more of fulfilling that mission, but also understanding and controlling our own destiny. I think that's true freedom, when we can fulfill our mission and control our own destiny. That's true freedom right there. And I think we don't have that understanding. We feel like we're on this individualistic level of, because I can do this and because I could do that, I'm the freest man in the world, or I'm the freest woman in the world, or whatever. And
Right.
that's not true, because somebody is controlling your purse strings, somebody is controlling act, the way you talk, different other things. I mean, many of us, including myself, are still in the process of decolonizing. When you talk about history, and mind you, a lot of stuff that I talk about on this show and many other shows about history, I've only learned in the past couple of years because it's been kept from me, in school.
Yeah.
And even, like my dad, who was my first history teacher, didn't know a lot of this stuff, but it was just me, researching, listening to different historians, and digging in places where nobody else wanted to go, understanding this, because I think this is not only just part of forging our identity, but also uncovering the radical histories that many white Americans want us to forget. When we talk about years, they always tell us, well, don't listen to Malcolm X because he was a violent man, and you should listen to Dr. King because Dr. King was all about peace and stuff like that. But then they want us to listen they want us to listen to the watered down King and not the revolutionary King. The Dr. King from the last 3 years of his life, who talked against war, who talked against capitalism, who talked against all of these things that America praises. So it's this rewriting of history that that is confusing us, and is moving us away from our mission.
And so it goes back
100%.
to Herb's point about you're talking about fulfilling a mission. Herb's like, can we even identify a mission outside of the construct of what we've been given?
Yeah, it's such a layered conversation and trying to get to it. And when you talk about, all of us, trying to still comprehend, trying to still unlearn, because there's that duality in the process. Okay, one, I have to learn these things, but then two, once I know those things, how do I go back and unlearn everything else I've been indoctrinated to believe, right? By the time you get out of the school system, they already got you. And so it's hard for you to get out of it because you've been trapped in, whether that's with mortgages and car notes and jobs and bills and all these things. So like I can't really get out of it now. I'm in it. And it takes a while to kind of to find your way out. And I think that's a process that we are all in. Gardis, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on and again sharing your wealth of knowledge and information, being the great historian and educator that you are and communicator. When I say communicator, I mean that because what you have is a very great ability to convey all the information, all the knowledge and information that you have, but then give it to people that makes it digestible, right? That maybe it otherwise would not be. And I think that is absolutely an example of phenomenal communication. But thank you so much again for being who you are, but for also sharing your time, sharing that information with all of us, my brother. Truly, truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, because this information is not just for me, it's for everybody. So that's my that's actually my spiritual mission of letting people know what I know, because this is not something, I mean, it's like, being a practicing Christian, love is not something that you keep. Love is something that you give. So this is something
that is a brother who has identified his mission and is well on the path to fulfilling it. His name is Gardis B. Knowing Stuff. You can call him Gardis Watts if you like. We got to go. Also, real quick, shout out to everybody who came out to 35th and King Drive to the Black Star Project, who had a great event in partnership with Everything Essential on Saturday for a back-to-school gift where the kids receive a lot of things they need and a lot of just great time and fellowship and entertainment. Thank you to everybody who showed up. We certainly appreciate that. Huge shout out to Anything Essential, absolutely Anything Essential gift shop. Shout out to King Renee and everybody up at Black Star for that. We got to go. Coming up next, the one and only King Salim Muwakil with the most astute listening audience in radio. For Philip Jackson, for Juliet Scott, and for Gardis Watts, my name is Herb Howard. You all have an amazing evening.